Hi everybody, welcome to my Nissan PAO Bluetooth radio modification video. This video will serve as a tutorial for those of you who've purchased my kit over here in adding Bluetooth capabilities to your radio. So this video is going to be completely freestyle. This is actually a customer radio that I will be modifying in this tutorial. So maybe you'll watch me make mistakes along the way or have some difficulties, and hopefully I'll be able to catch those and explain them directly. Or when I watch this video in post, I'll make sure to add small captions here or there if or when I make any mistakes. So radio out of the way, let me kind of talk about the project itself. This project, I would say, is kind of intermediary in terms of soldering and whatnot. If you're just starting out soldering, maybe choose a slightly different project. There is also some desoldering involved. In fact, I do have a small $20 pump right here, but that is not always necessary. In fact, you may not even watch me use it in this video tutorial. There is some physical hardware modification to the radio when it comes to like drilling and whatnot that you may need to do as well. Well, you will need to do, but you'll see that later. So if you've soldered before, especially circuit boards and whatnot, not just big wires, this project shouldn't be too difficult for you. So let's go over what comes in the kit that I've supplied. First off, you have this nice little custom-made circuit board. Very proud of this one. You can see a nice little PAO logo there. Camera focuses. There we go. Obviously, maybe you should have one. This module right here, this is our Bluetooth module. It's currently in production, but who knows, it could go out of production. It runs off of 12 volts, which is required for this project. We have 6 black oxide M3 by 4 millimeter screws right here with accompanying 3 nylon 1 centimeter standoffs. And then we have 2 stainless screws of the same spec as before, and this brass standoff that is also 1 centimeter M3, and that's for grounding. Right here we have this 1N40002 diode, relay, 10,000 ohm resistor. You'll also get these are 2.2 nanofarad capacitors and 4.7 nanofarad capacitors. So that's what comes with the kit. Most of this stuff is simply for assembling the circuit board as well as mounting. I'm not supplying any wire unless it's really specifically requested, but I do recommend 24 gauge wire, so 24 American wire gauge. So if you're in Europe, you may need to look at a chart for what that is, and I'll be giving measurements here in imperial units. So some of the required materials, right here we have a 3 millimeter drill bit, a center punch, let's see, just like pencil and Sharpie for some marking. This is just a little piece of random wood that I have when I'm drilling the case. This is flux. It's very nice to have if you do any soldering. It's good for cleaning and whatnot of the contacts before soldering. Really helps for adhesion and strong solder joints. Screwdrivers of a couple of different sizes. This is a smaller one, and this is like a big number 3 Phillips or something. You don't need a key, but you do need a knife of some sort. So I like using just a small keychain Swiss Army knife. 12 millimeter socket, and you can probably see it's a pretty long one. You're going to need a longer one, which you'll see later. Flush cutters, awesome for cutting wire and whatnot, and some other things. Little tweezers are always nice to have. Wire strippers, a multimeter, Doesn't need to be this nice fancy one. It can be a pretty cheap one, mostly just for testing continuity and if ever we want to, test voltage across something. And for measuring your wire, a ruler is always nice to have as well. You're also going to need a drill, and I've got some 6040 lead solder right here. I really do recommend going with the lead stuff because it provides way higher quality solder joints. Obviously, do make sure to be in a ventilated area when using it, and some masking tape of some sort. All right, so I'm going to get started. I'm going to try to talk through everything that I'm doing. So yeah, I may speed up some parts of this just so you're not watching a video that's way too long, especially if I'm just screwing or unscrewing, blah blah blah. So I'm going to clear my work surface here a little bit now. So for the main body of the radio, I do recommend this bigger Phillips screwdriver. And so the camera right now will be staying where it is. If anything is ever kind of difficult to see, I'll try to identify that in post and post some higher details of it, as well as maybe add some little diagrams, etc. of where stuff needs to go, because some of the stuff in here is pretty small. I'll try to do my best. So you can simply start off. There's 4 screws. There we go. What we're going to be doing is taking apart the entire unit right from the get-go. I just think it's easier that way. And I'll also try to point out which screws are the same and which screws need to be separated. All right, so we got 4 screws off there. And we can take the top off now. And well, welcome to the inside of your radio. What you're looking at right here is the cassette drive. That'll be leaving as well, but before we get to that step, let's keep removing the chassis of the radio. So the next 4 screws I'm tackling here in the corners are the exact same as the screws from before. I believe they're M3s, which is kind of nice because the kit that I've included, the screws are actually compatible with the factory screws from the radio. So you should not be at risk of stripping anything, or cross-threading rather. Do be careful with stripping, especially if this is your first time taking this apart, if it's never been taken apart. Make sure you've got the right size screwdriver, and I really like this big number 3 for these screws. These 2 screws that I'm tackling right now, same screwdriver, works very well for them. These are different from the chassis screws, and these screws are very important as they tie into a heatsink. So when you're running, if you're testing the radio without this back cover, don't do it for too long, because this back cover does serve as a heatsink, as you'll see very shortly. Get that out. Okay. And see, I'm just going to leave these 2 for now. So like I said, these 2 screws are different. They're quite a bit longer, easy to identify. You do have this piece of tape right here, this little piece of felt that aids for vibration. So what I usually do is that I just take my knife, pop it out, and slide it. So let's take these screws out. These 4 screws are the same as the other body screws, so just keep them in the same pile, it doesn't matter. Okay, boom, look at that. Whoop. Okay, perfect. So we got near perfect cut, so that's always kind of satisfying. As you can see, the back is now falling off, and you'll probably notice I did leave these 2 screws in just for this little bumper. Don't bother taking them out, just don't even bother touching this. So as you can see, there is a little thermal paste here, something of that sort, which helps keep some parts back here cooler. Okay, we are almost done. We just have to take off this front plate. So the knobs are gonna have to go. This part's always a little tough, but you should be able to just kind of grab onto them and pull them off like that. Just get a good grip. This one's slightly easier. It's quite a bit smaller, so you can see the size difference there between the two, and you won't get these mixed up. And then this little part, I just kind of like rocking back and forth, working it off. It's sometimes a little tougher just because of the shape of it. It's kind of recessed, and there we go, it's off. Toss those in the box. Okay, and we just have a couple more screws to go, the ones on the handles. So these ones, I like taking this screwdriver for, it just fits in better. There we go. And these screws are different. I believe they're, the length of them is a little different from the body, and these are this nice like brass color. Slide that out. All right, the last thing we're going to tackle in here is getting the drive out in here. Let's see, grab this screwdriver. There's 4 screws, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, before we go any further, we've got all our screws out. So I'm just gonna grab my organizer here. It features all the parts that I need to modify these radios. I'm just gonna drop these in accordingly. So the longest screws that are like brass in color, those are the screws for the handles. Okay, those are 7mm screws. The cassette screws are also brass. There's 4 of those, and they are 6mm. We have our 2 little heatsink screws. Those are 12mm. And then we have all of our body screws, which those ones are 6mm. So next step is we can just take the cassette drive out. There's 2 cables plugged into it, one back here. Also kind of take note how the cables get folded behind this little tab right here. It's just good that, you know, when you're closing it back up, you just slide those back in there. It's just a nice little design. So just pull parallel to the connector, boom, no little tabs or anything. And then there's another one that's right here on the left. It's a little tricky to get to. So what we do is that we take the cassette drive, kind of bend it downwards, pull it back, all right? And then just grip the connector right here, pull down, and there we go. Cassette drive is out, all right? And you can set this off to the side, won't need it. let's pop off the front face. So you'll see there are these plastic tabs right here on each side, so 2 on each side, so for a total of 4. They are fairly strong and I have never broken them, but be careful. So I usually like to slide, if you've got them, fingernails under, just kind of pop them out, and you gotta kind of work it, just be gentle. So boom, and then do the bottom ones. There we go. I just trimmed my fingernails yesterday, so as you can see, it's not too difficult a process. There we go. This dial is now exposed to us, so as you can see, the owner of this one has it set to the line just above the 80. It's probably on the 80 itself. It is free moving, which means I can kind of just, move it with my finger. That doesn't change where the radio is tuned to, but if you power it on, now the needle's not going to be synced properly. Sometimes what I like to do is power these on, reset it until I see it switching to one side or the other and keep it there, and then I know that's in the right spot. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But just be careful with it. And the next thing to watch out for though with this dial is that you have this center little button here that when you click it, it seeks the radio channels. This is very prone to falling out, so I'm just going to try and get it out myself so I don't lose it. Get it out there with tweezers. Thing is that the first time this thing falls out, there we go. So see, it comes out very easily. Most oftentimes it just falls out on its own, and if you lose it or you don't put it back in, it's kind of annoying. So I'll put that off to the side for safekeeping as well. The next thing that we want to do, I know it's probably exciting to assemble the circuit board and everything, but we're actually going to use it and the Bluetooth module as a template for where we want to mount all this stuff. So first thing I like to do is actually tape off these leads. The general area that we'll be mounting all of this hardware to is going to be these 2 sides right here next to this corner. The next step is going to be important to listen to, just so that you only ever have to drill these holes once, because fitment is super important, and there's very little play when it comes to this fitment. So you're going to want to have your PAO logo in the top left when it's mounted inside the radio. So it's going to look something like this. My thumb's covering it, of course, but that's kind of your general gist, but there will be a standoff there elevating it 1 centimeter from there. So what I traditionally like to do is set it right here. That's a good spot for it, kind of close to this hole. But we're not reusing that hole or anything like that. That's just for the shell itself. So what I do is that I take my board, I keep in the same orientation, and I just slide it over to the other side. So I take it out like this and move it over like this, all right? So I find an approximate spot where I want it to be, and that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to drill out the part of this circuit board that has the hole that actually serves as a ground, and the ground is this part that has this like silver part on it. So I'm just going to mark where that hole needs to go. So I've got my Sharpie mark, and I'm going to take my center punch, and there we go. Just put a nice little divot in there. So next step is to drill that out. You do have these kind of poking on you, so I traditionally like to just kind of set this on my lap and do it. I've just got a limited setup here, so you're probably not going to see this part of the video. It's probably going to get cut out. I've just completed the drilling of this let me step up here, this 3mm hole right here. And this is where this little wood block comes in handy, because I just stick it behind here and it creates a surface that I can kind of press back against without hurting myself when the drill bit goes through. And you're gonna get, you know, maybe a couple of burrs on the inside. You can just kind of brush off with your finger or use pliers to remove. So this is where you want to make sure that you didn't, you know, get too excited and like pre-solder this or anything. So I'm going to stick this board back on here like this, all right? And I'm actually going to take some of my mounting hardware, and usually I just use a nut that I have, but I'll show it with everything I'm providing you. So I'll put the screw back in here. Stand through the hole, there you go, pokes through. And then I'll thread this standoff on here. Sorry, let me get back in the shot. Okay. And actually looks pretty good, but I'm gonna adjust the board to where I like it, the angle and everything, just, you know, make it nice and parallel with everything else. You just scoot it just a smidge down. And this is where I'm gonna make my next hole. So now I'm going to, I'm not even gonna mark it with a Sharpie. I'm just going to take my center punch, try to get in there as center as I can. Okay. And this is just a mounting hole. It's not, you know, meant for grounding or anything like that. So next step is, just so that I get this hole perfectly centered, is that I start to drill it with the board on here. And once I get, again, nice like divot that's pretty well established, I'm going to remove the hardware that I just put on and finish drilling it off camera. So just take that off. Okay, set this all back here nicely. There we go. And I'm gonna drill this off camera now. We've got our second hole drilled here, and just deburred it a little bit on the inside. So next up, we're going to want to do the holes for the Bluetooth module. And the way I like to typically mount this in here is to have your line out. So this actually features two line out places on it. You know, this mini jack one and this little connector right here. I like to have them positioned like this, in this orientation. So what you're going to want to do is take it, just flip it backwards. It's fine because all the holes are symmetrical. And I usually like to position the height where this cassette little bracket thing right here kind of splits these two connectors, and have it nice and parallel with this down here. So same process as before. I'm going to put like one hole up here, and then fasten this board down while I make a second hole on the other side. So same process as our little circuit board from earlier. So I'm gonna do that off camera, and I'm gonna come back and I'll have two more holes drilled. I now have two very nice holes drilled right here. If we take our board, just lay it over there. Let's see here. We can see that our holes line up perfectly, which will make mounting this a lot easier. So we're done drilling now, and we're gonna keep kind of going on with our prep work. We're going to be removing this unit right here, which feeds through the case and is connected to this this right here. So we're gonna want to take our 12mm, and this is why we need it to be a long one, because it needs to fit all the way over. So you can see there's really not that much room left, so we just slide it over. This is a pretty specialty nut. You'd probably have to search around for something like this. I don't think you can really get this at the hardware store or anything, so just make sure you don't lose it. So now this board just slides right out, and to make life simpler, we'll disconnect it from down here. It's a similar connector as the last one, so just grip it and pull up. You may need to wiggle it, and there we go, it's out without any harm to it. The beauty of this mod is that we don't have to add any sort of ugly switches or anything to the radio unit itself. From the outside, it will look exactly like it did before and function almost identically. What we're doing is that we're repurposing the little outdoor switch. It's actually this collar right here switches between indoor and outdoor. And we use the outdoor setting, which is like this really crappy artificial bass boost or something. We use that as our switch to turn on the Bluetooth module as well as feed the audio signal from it. So in order to do this, what we need to do is you have 10 pins right here for this connector. Well, when I say connector, for this right here, you're basically going to want to cut the trace around this entire part right here. So these traces, thankfully, are visible and very obvious. Half of them don't actually go anywhere, so you don't have to worry about them. But using your multimeter, you can put it in continuity mode and understand maybe first where things are going, and then check whether or not you've actually cut the trace. So you're going to see these blue marks a lot everywhere. Whenever you see that, that just means that there is a trace running underneath there. So let me try to get up close here and describe a bit more in detail. Let's try to talk about this bottom right one right here. So if we see the trace, it's kind of going out to the right, down, right, and it passes underneath this blue mark right here, and then turns into this little sliver where it keeps going down a little bit and to these 2 points right here. So if we drop our multimeter and put it in continuity mode and we hit this point and then either one of these two pads, it's obviously going to ring and show us that we got continuity. So when we're cutting through, we want to slice that trace and then test for continuity and make sure we don't have any sort of connection there. So let me just demonstrate that real quick. So excuse the camera angle, I've only got two hands, so I'm pressing this bottom right one and then one of these two. As you can hear, we're getting continuity. We're getting a solid tone. So when we cut the trace there, obviously we should get no more continuity. So just, take a few minutes. Take a few minutes really to look where all these traces are going. Like I said, half of them don't actually go anywhere. The two in the top left don't go anywhere. This second one on the bottom from the left doesn't. Third one from the bottom doesn't go anywhere as well. So you've only got to worry about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You only have to worry about 6 out of the 10. Now, the trickiest one is this bottom left one right here, because it's got this very large trace, but it does get very skinny right here. So this tends to be, let me move this more in focus. This tends to be between these two pads right here, the best place to cut it. Everybody's gonna have a different approach when it comes to this. I just like using my knife that's on my Swiss Army knife. I basically just use the tip really, and I just kind of grind it all through here. I've tried also using the flush cutters and cutting the circuit board, which I've had mixed results with, as sometimes it just kind of cuts way too much. It goes into other traces, then you have to fix them, which is kind of annoying. But I've also found that a good middle ground is scoring with the knife these traces and then gently coming in with the flush cutters. But everybody's gonna have a different approach. But also, if you're kind of experienced with all this, you know, if you go too far, you'll probably be able to fix it. So, like I said, my technique for this is to take the knife, flip it upside down, and I'm basically going to be taking care of two traces right here, and I'm just going to be going in a motion like this. So I'm going to do this off camera because it is a little delicate and I don't want to hurt myself on camera. So let me just show that motion again, just kind of, you know, working it back and forth, really digging in there though. All right, so I'll show you the final results afterwards. All right, so that took me about 10 minutes to do. So let me show you the work I've done here. Like I said, we're interested in isolating 6 of these. And I did score and then use flush cutters. Now you'll probably notice that I actually messed up this little area right here. This is the unpredictability of using flush cutters. You know, you can try scoring as much as you want, and on this side it worked out very well for me, and I don't have any of these traces still connected to these original pins, and I tested that with the multimeter. And down here, as you can see, I scored between these 2 traces, and now this bottom left point no longer hits this, is no longer connected to this little spot right here. Like I said though, you know, using flush cutters, I didn't score this at all, but that's where, you know, the break decided to happen. Had it gone further down, that would have been a real problem, but looking at it, just where the traces are connected, these 2 are now perfectly isolated, which means that this cut, which goes through this point right here, doesn't actually matter at all. It is kind of my hypothesis at this point in time, but if I do notice any problems, I'll probably just come back in and solder a wire from here to here, because that's where the trace goes, but it shouldn't prove to be an issue at all. So like I said, there were 6 points that we isolated, and I used the multimeter to make sure that I'm not getting continuity between any of these pins and their accompanying pads, you know, down the line. So now what we gotta do is solder a couple of jumpers on here. So I'm going to post a diagram right here of where it's supposed to go, and I will be right back to show you the process of soldering that. What I like to do is that I take the diode that comes in the kit, and obviously the legs are way too long for this thing. So what I like to do once it kind of gets in focus there is just cut off just a tiny section from each of these just to act as jumpers across a couple of these pins. So I let the soldering iron heat up a little bit, and I've remarked on here where these jumpers are going to have to go. So these top right 2 pads right here, so I'm going to have to connect those together, and then with this little mark Sharpie right here between these 2 pads. And like I said, I took the diode leg, I trimmed it down a little bit, just put it against those 2 pins, see how long it was, and you know, it's like that's what I'm soldering on there. It's very small. So let me do that. Now you are dealing with, you know, solder that is potentially 30 years old at this point. So I do like to use my little flux pen here. These things are pretty nice to have. Just kind of use it on those pads. All right. And I also like to you know, apply some new solder to these. Feels like one of those instances where, you know, you can't really have too much of it. Just don't go overboard, I guess. Okay. So I'm gonna grab little tweezers, one of these little jumpers, and heat up one of the pads. Okay. So it's on one of them. Just gotta get on the other one. A little tricky. Obviously, you can't touch it with your fingers. move it over a little bit. Eventually it all kind of melts as one, and we've got this nice bridge right there. Okay, grab the other one and repeat the same process. I like to start on the outside. Okay, it's attached to that one. And there we go. Very simple. Let me come back up here. That's what it should look like in the end. All right. And you know, minus this little boo-boo from earlier, which once again may not be an issue, we are completely done with this part. Just always good rule of thumb, just check the continuity of these pins again with anything else. All right. All right, I know I said we were done with this one, but we now have 2 wires to solder to it. So for these lengths, I typically like to do 3 inches and 6 inches. So I'm just gonna measure those out and cut them real quick. And when stripping these wires, you know, make sure you're dropping in the 24 gauge if you're using 24 gauge like I recommend. And when you're soldering these pins, I recommend really stripping off, you know, barely any when going on that board itself. And then you can do a little bit more on the other side, but I like to keep it all pretty short. So we've got a 3-inch wire and a 6-inch wire right here. And our 3-inch wire is going to be going on, and I'll put a diagram for this again, this left one right here. And then the 6-inch one goes for the bottom row, second from the right, so right here. So I'm going to add some new solder to both of those. All right. And I'm just going to apply some flux to these. You can also pre-tin them if you want. I like putting flux because they'll very quickly adhere to those points. I find that if you pre-tin them, you kind of burn off more of the protective stuff off there. So alrighty, give that the pull test. Can't rip it off, see? And my other piece of wire right here. Oops. Give that the pull test as well. Not coming off, so just show you once again, little 3-inch wire is on this left part and the 6-inch wire is on this part. Set my little diode over here. Okay, we can set this aside now. Let's move on to assembling the circuit board. This part is fairly straightforward. As you'll probably notice, nearly everything is marked on there. Relay just drops in here like this. You can't mess it up. You can't, you know, put it on the wrong side or whatever. It only goes in one way. Pay attention to the polarity of the capacitors. You know, positive right here, and then negative on the capacitor is indicated by this by this golden stripe. And last thing that goes on here is the diode, which goes right here, and it does have this little dash indicating the polarity, which matches the diode itself. And pay attention for the capacitors where it says 2.2 and 4.7. So you got two 2.2s and four 4.7s to solder on. So I'm going to assemble this. Excellent. So this is our completed unit. Let me bring it up here. So there we go. So kind of line things back up here. Doesn't really matter. We're not really going to see them. But 6 capacitors, 1 relay, 1 diode. Flip it over to the other side. This is basically what it should be looking like. You probably saw me earlier, just kind of cleaning up over here. This is where we'll be attaching the power for the Bluetooth module, and then this will go to various places on the radio circuit board, as well as the audio inputs from the Bluetooth module. First thing that we're going to want to do is connect this little 3-inch piece of wire to a jumper that's in the radio. That jumper, wow, look at that. Look at how good that looks, is number J122. Let me point it out here. It's right there, okay? Now, I'm trying to keep, you know, wires short and everything, so it's not the easiest one to solder onto, especially it's a jumper. So what I really recommend for this is that you put some flux on here and then you pre-tin the jumper itself. And then once you've pre-tinned the jumper, that's when you're going to want to also pre-tin the wire, that little 3-inch piece of wire, and then you'll be able to solder it on to here pretty easily. So this is really crucial. You know, if you've got experience soldering, this is definitely one of those crucial moments where you want to make sure that you're applying solder directly, not to the iron, but to the piece you're working on, in order to get good adhesion. And you can kind of get started by applying it first to the iron and then the piece, but your goal is to get solder on the piece and not the iron. It's not touching anything else. You definitely don't need to go that big. It just kind of fell off of the iron, but hey, I'm not going to complain. Let's take this next. pre-tin the wire a little bit. All right. Like I said, it is kind of short, so you're gonna have to excuse me. The angle here is going to be kind of awful, so I'll show up close, you know, what it looks like once it's in there. I do recommend using the tweezers for this part. There we go. I want to say, you know, kind of simple. Let me come back up here and show you. As you can see, our wire is really nicely on there. Never gonna come off. So what we can do now is actually put this back in. So slide it through there. Okay. Can attach the connector again to it as well. Boom. Okay. And that connector, as you can see, is back in there. So I'm going to now put the nut back on this piece and secure it back in with this 6-inch wire still hanging out of here. Okay, so we've now got everything back in place. This little module right here, this is all back in place, not moving. We've got our little wire with a ball of solder on there, and this wire sticking out of it that will be coming over here. So the next place where we'll be turning our attention to are these jumpers right here, and to be specific, that would be J62 and J63. So they're right here. Let me try to get close as I can. So not J64, you don't want to pay attention to that one, you just want to pay attention to J62 and J63, okay? So we're going to be removing those jumpers, and the simplest method that I've found to do this is simply take your flush cutters, and that's why it's really good to have flush cutters, and try to clip the middle of each of them. Okay, 1 and 2, okay? And I'll even try to take my pliers and kind of, my tweezers and kind of bend them vertically. So you want to try to get these symmetrical so you got some length, but apparently I missed the mark there. And one side's way longer than the other. Not a huge issue. Okay, it's nice to get these vertical. Now this next step of desoldering these is once again kind of going to come down to personal preference. But let me show you on the back where you need to look at, because it gets kind of confusing back here. So try to always maintain or understand, you know, your axis and everything, especially when you start flipping things over, stuff starts to get mirrored. So we are interested in 4 points that are towards the back of the radio, not the front of the radio. So when we flip it over, our 4 points are right here, okay? And we're interested in the ones that are towards the, let me get this closer, towards the back of the radio. So let me Sharpie those real quick. So you're interested in this segment right here. You don't want to touch these bottom two. Remember, that's for the other jumper J64 that we're not interested in. Okay. So soldering iron is still hot, and this operation is a little tricky. Got a little bit of solder on there. Basically, you want to heat each one of these up and then pull the jumper through that you split. So, you know, you can pull it through, you know, going this way or this way. It's going to be personal preference. I strained them out so I could get a good grip on them, and I'm going to try to, you know, grab them through one side, and if it doesn't work, I'll try to grab through the other. So, grabbing one of them right now, and then I'm heating up the pad. You're not going to get a very good angle of this. I can see it's moving. Okay. And there we go, came right through. So, you know, this is what you're, I don't know if it's gonna focus on that. You know, that's what you're taking out. Look at that. Ended up being very simple. Okay. And while we're here, desoldering things, we are also going to turn our attention to a couple of resistors that we have in here. You have to fold this wire kind of out of the way to see both of them. You've got resistor 312 right here, okay, and resistor 212, I forget, these might be like 1 kilo ohm or something, but don't get them confused for the resistors right above each one. So you're not paying attention to 313 or, you know, 213. You're paying attention to R312 and R212. All right, and for R312, that is printed above the resistor, but for 212, it's printed below the below the resistor, okay? You want to remove both of these. And we're gonna be replacing it with a 10 kilo ohm resistors. So it's gonna be similar to the jumpers, although we're not gonna be cutting these. You're just kind of asking for a bad time there. So I'm gonna circle on the back where you need to, you know, put your soldering iron to, and I'll show you how to do that. Alrighty, so as you can see here, you know, I've got, here, let me kind of, okay, just so you can get your point of reference, zooming back in. We've got this, you know, nice like silver line right here that goes around. So we're interested in, what we're going to be doing is trying to heat up both of these points at the same time, so the solder melts, you know, at the same time on each side, so we can try to pull out that resistor. And then you're also interested in this one right here, okay? Now, once again, you know, try to really get your bearings. So, you know, the backmost one, if we look at which one's, you know, more towards the back, it's R212. So we'll try to go for R212 first, which is once again located right there. So for this step, you can actually, let's see, no, that's too big. Too big for me at least, but with the tweezers, you know, you should be able to grip on there and try to pull it through. Like I said, you're gonna wanna try to heat both of the pads at the same time, so they're close enough to each other that you might be able to lay your iron across both of them. The legs are bent, which doesn't help the situation, but with enough patience, you can get it. But just like that, we're left with 2 little holes in there, and R212 is gone. So now I just need to repeat the process with R312. When you're done, you should have pulled out both of these resistors, which once again are the same resistor value. Okay, and since we're here, we can easily take the 2 10 kilo ohm resistors from our kit, all right, and we can attach them back in here. And in case you're not familiar with resistors, they don't have polarity, so you don't need to care about which leg goes where. One trick though is I recommend, the way I recommend doing it is having the resistor be vertical and then bending one of the legs down, okay? Because these resistors are larger than the previous ones. So once again, I don't care about the polarity. Okay, just bend it down like that. Be straight. Then put them through and solder them through. Let me show you once again. We now have our 2 nice little blue 10 kilo ohm resistors soldered in the place of those other resistors in slots, once again, R312 and R212. Okay. Next step now is to start soldering some wires that will be going to our board right here. So the 4 wires that are going in where we remove those jumpers at J62 and J63, I like to make those approximately 6 inches. You can make them longer. 6 inches is definitely kind of on the short side where, you know, things might be a little taut. They're gonna look really nice in the end. But you can go longer if you feel like you need to go longer, but just try to keep all of those wires the same length. And even going up 1 inch in terms of wire length is actually surprisingly a lot. So you probably don't go more than more than 2 inches over 6. So yeah, don't go over 8 inches. And I typically like to use color coordinated wire. So I always use green, blue, orange, and yellow for this. You definitely don't have to. I just find that it's easier that way. I just buy it that way, and that way when I'm assembling these, it's, you know, very consistent throughout. I know where everything goes. So you can buy, you know, like 2 feet of wire or something that's multiple colors for pretty cheap. This is the approximate amount that I'm stripping off of here, really not very much. Now this next part is, I guess, personal preference, although I don't know which method I prefer. What I've traditionally been doing is soldering my wires first to the circuit board and then to here. It may prove easier to solder first to this little circuit board and then to the radio. You might have a little more control here. It just gets a little awkward, but for, you know, just the purpose of not trying anything new this time, I'm just going to do it as I traditionally do, which is solder to the circuit board of the radio first and then to this little one, but, you know, feel free to experiment with that. And if you are using the same color wire as me, I like to do blue in the top left of J62 and orange in the top right of J62, green in the bottom left of J63, and yellow in the bottom right of J63. So I'll start with blue. Remember, really try to understand, you know, where you are with all this, since you're flipping it around and everything. There we go. So there are our 4 wires in. Okay, give them a little test again. They're all good. And I'm just checking that my regular order is correct. Blue, green, orange, and yellow. Yes. Just turn it over and let's see, that's our little square right there. As you can see, I mean, it looks almost like a factory solder job right there. All right, so let's take a look at our Bluetooth transmitter. And let me explain the few approaches that we have here. What I've traditionally done in the past is we've got both of these outputs, which is super nice, you know, in case you just have a 3.5mm jack you're wanting to connect to. It makes it very simple. And they do supply this cable right here, which plugs into this little connector nicely. And then, you know, it's, I don't know, 8-inch, 9 inches, something like that. And then you can plug that into whatever else you want. Now, traditionally what I've done is I've actually not used this cable, and I've cut my own 24 gauge wire and soldered directly to these pads where it says like ground, left, and right, just for a nice solid connection. But I understand that, you know, it comes with this cable, so a lot of you will probably be tempted to use it. So I'm going to apply it this time. Because of our mounting solution, I mean, it's not too long or anything like that. We can kind of slide it in there and like snake it through. So we'll attach it like that, but what you need to be careful of is that it's one of those cables where the ground is not its own wire in here. It's just kind of like all inside of this protective plastic right here, whatever it's called. So when you're cutting this, you really have to cut it at the connector itself in order to actually have the longest amount of wire possible. So let me cut it right there, because if you cut it down here, you're only going to actually find a red and a white wire with, you know, the ground that's just kind of intertwined between them. So we can just, sorry, I'm trying to focus. We can just strip these now and use them as is. But if you do fail that, you can always solder directly to here. It's not an issue. It's my preferred method, but this works as well. And I'll probably use the 28 gauge strippers for this. To power this thing, we have this little connector right here. What you have to do is slide in a couple of, I like to do 6-inch wires. You can see it says positive and negative. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see right there. Otherwise, you can do what I've also done in the past is solder directly to the pins back here, just for a very nice connection. But I have found that these are pretty solid. You can strip these a little longer since they're going in those connectors. I'll show you how those connectors work. And then strip the other sides just like you're stripping the other ones, since those are going and soldered onto our circuit board. In order to get these wires in here, there is a little manual with this. It'll explain it as well, but just take like a small screwdriver, like the small screwdriver we were using earlier, and press down on there. Let me try to see if I can do it in the air. No guarantees here. So my wire can only go in so far right now, and then I press down and I can push it the rest of the way. And there we go. We've got a nice, it is nice and tight in there. And I can always, you know, very quickly with my multimeter, hit this wire and then hit this other side and see if it connects properly. Let me just do this with the red wire, show you a second time. So you can see it's kind of stopped right there, and then this is so difficult to do with one hand or in the air. I'm gonna have to do it down here. There we go. So both these are in here, they're both in, and just for the fun of it, I'll just test that they are connected using the continuity tester. So I'll try the ground on that one. So we're good there. Let's try the positive. Yeah, we're good. It was kind of difficult holding those together, so that's why it was kind of beeping there. So we can kind of set this aside now. Next, we're going to start to actually solder all of our wires to this board right here. So I'm gonna put up another diagram like here in the corner, detailing, you know, which parts, you know, which wires from these jumpers go to which numbers, as well as, you know, the audio and our little brown signal right here. And what I like to do is I thread them in through the top and then solder on the bottom, kind of like how we've done with everything else here. You'll just see that the one difference is when we connect the power for the Bluetooth module, I like to actually snake them underneath and then solder them right here, but you'll see that later. Sometimes it's also nice to just kind of, you can kind of set the board actually on the rim, or the edge rather, of the radio, and it kind of holds it there for you while you're soldering. Look at that. So it's like sliding my wire right in here. Okay. And then boom. It's like I got another hand helping me. Okay, and then the brown wire that came from here, that goes to pin number 8. Okay, pin number 8. And hopefully it's long enough. It seemed like it might have actually been a little short, and if it's too short, I'll rectify that just by soldering on a little extension to it. Okay, so that's 5 wires soldered on there. Ready? Just gonna organize these a little bit. We're going to be good on our wire length. So this is what our work currently looks like. So as you can see, when you and once this gets tighter, you'll see, but once it's all done, you'll see kind of why it's nice to keep these wire lengths short, is that it just all looks nice in here and tidy, and it's out of the way. So next up, we can solder our audio wires from our Bluetooth module. Once again, I'll post a diagram to, you know, what goes where. Just for reference though, red wires are typically always associated with right audio, red for right, left is white, and then black is of course ground. There we go. Got all those wires in. Those were definitely a little tricky, but they're all there. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount into the radio this Bluetooth transmitter. And then that way I'll solder these wires afterwards. And for simplicity, I'm going to take this connector off. And hopefully I'll find some, you know, nice way of routing it in here. So we'll be taking our mounting hardware here and attaching one black oxide screw through here to the standoff. I'll do it on the opposite side. And get our small screwdriver, start securing it on the other side. And you're about to see this is completely effortless because we used it as a template earlier for drilling. All right, and maybe you can see this, I'm actually routing the power cables underneath, and that's going to be common here, is they're going to be staying underneath. And it seems like they're probably going to be just the right length too. So So now I'm going to solder them. I've marked on here positive and negative, well, positive at least, so red for me is positive in this case. And there we go. That's all connected. So I'm just going to route everything now. It's a little tedious when you got, you know, a lot of wires kind of pulling in different directions. You'll see it all kind of falls into place. And we can start putting our mounting hardware on here. So, as you can see, like I said, this brass standoff serves as a ground as well. So you have to make sure that you're putting it in the proper hole. Okay, so it's the one that's got, you know, this little silver around the rim. Okay, so we can start securing that. And you need to make sure that you're using the stainless screw with it. The black oxide screws do not conduct electricity. So, you know, if you get it mixed up or something, you're not going to break anything. It's just not going to work. And that'll be the reason why. So, if you can kind of diagnose it yourself, you know, you might not hear the relay, you know, clicking or something. So hopefully it'll be pretty easy, but yeah. They're nylon, they're a little easier to cross thread, so, you know, if you feel like it's not going in super easy, just, you know, don't force it, ease back out on it. Okay. So don't worry about the wires. Putting the screw through the back of the case now. There we go. And just need one more. I hope this isn't too out of frame. Let me move back in here. Oh, hold on. I almost made a mistake here. If you remember, I want this power cable to be running underneath it. Let me back off on this one a little bit. There we go. Try to slide it underneath. May prove to be a little too short. I'm sure once we get it, it'll go just fine. There we go. And those just go all underneath the cassette drive. There we go. There we go. Goes in very easily. Okay, now we just kind of route our wires underneath here. Make sure none of them are going to be in the way. This one, like I said, is fairly long for what we need. So I just lay it down here somewhere. And a couple of caps. Kind of wedge it in. Shouldn't run into any troubles. I've built many of these, so I mean, if I hear anything weird, maybe I'll try to see if that's a culprit. Plug it in. And there we go. There we go. So now if we take a look at our work, this one I'm very proud of now. Let me just tuck those under there. Look at that. Look at that. So now, you know, everything's kind of out of the way, just kind of tucked neatly in there. Everything's short, so we shouldn't run into too many troubles or any troubles at all. And so now it's time to test it out. This is the fun part now. Let's see. I want to try to do this on camera. So let me clear my workspace a little bit and get back to you in a minute. Turn it on. Okay, and now I'm gonna, let's see, get power it on. Awesome. So first, right off the bat, we're hearing static coming from the left channel right here and right channel right here. Okay, and now let's flip. And look at that. You can see our Bluetooth transmitter is just turned on. So let me, I can't use my iPhone because I'm currently recording with this. I've got my old Android right here. It's in awful shape. And so, yeah, sorry for my awful screen. The Android's just finding it. Okay, it made a little Windows sound there.
Left channel.
Okay.
Right channel. Both channels.
And there we go. And now we're sure that this unit is perfectly functional now. So we can reassemble it. The reassembly truly is just the reverse of the assembly. Let me just show you though. I'm going to kind of speed through it, but I'll show you how to put the cassette drive back in because it's a little tricky. Take all that off, and I'm just gonna connect this one for now. A little tougher because it's a shorter one. Okay, so in order to do this properly, you need to orient it downwards like this, okay? And then you need to slide it forward. Sometimes it helps to press on the little cassette drive door as well. There we go, that's what I was missing. Press on the little cassette door and then make sure that you can actually press it in and out, because if you don't put it in right, you're not going to be able to push this in. So that's all good. And now we can put in our cassette screws, which are brass ones, or brass colored. tuck that little cable under there. This little slot. There we go. And plug this in. And there we go. Place the top back on there, and then just your last 4 shell screws. And it's all done. And just like that, we've added Bluetooth back to this original head unit, this beautiful head unit. And we've, managed to retain the factory look. We haven't added any sort of switches on the outside, and it's perfect. So all you have to do is flip the switch to outdoor and listen to your own tunes. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching this. Hopefully it was fairly easy to follow. Like I said, it was all freestyle, so some stuff might have happened that wouldn't usually happen, or I made a mistake earlier. Talked about correcting it, etc. If you have any questions about the install process, go ahead and leave a comment, or feel free to reach out to me through the Facebook group. If you have any sort of technical questions, just send me a private message about those. If you have any suggestions or comments, feel free to leave them as well. And thank you so much. All right, enjoy.